Hi everybody. I'm going to give everybody a few minutes to kind of sign on, but I'm here for the tips and techniques from the designers virtual show. And so I want you to join for the next today, tomorrow, and the next day. There every hour on the hour will be several designers giving various tips and tricks for the business. Hey Valerie. For quilting. So let's see, I don't know what to say until I get started, so I'll just say hi to everybody and give everybody a few minutes to join. Hey Angie. So I'm hoping that my dogs behave during this, because if they hear any sort of squirrel in the backyard, they go a little crazy. So if that happens, you know what has happened. So hey Linda. So today I am going to give a little tip about, hey Deb, labels. Hey Bonnie. So as a designer, I think part of the thing with designing is that we want to tell a story, right? So sometimes a story is with the quilting, sometimes it's with the pattern, sometimes it's with fabric, and sometimes it's just the process of how you made it, right? Hey Betty. So I want to talk about labels. And the reason I want to talk about labels is because I think they're such a great way to tell a story with a quilt. And I know not everybody likes labels, but for quilting it is such a huge thing, because it tells the history of the quilt, right? Or it tells something about the quilt. And so I'll kind of go through some of the different labels after I kind of talk about why I think they're such an important part of telling the story of a quilt. And hey Judy. So I'll give you this little story while we're doing, but my last name is Horton, and so when I got pregnant with my first baby, everybody gave us Dr. Seuss books, because Horton hears a who, Horton hatches an egg, and this is of course before the movies came out, but we had actually the whole collection of Dr. Seuss books before my first baby was born. And so Dr. Seuss books are just kind of a part of our family story. And then The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, like who doesn't love the Grinch, right? Because his heart grows and, you know, things change and whatever. Well, one of my boys, the very first movie he saw in the theater was Jim Carrey's version of the Grinch. So that even like solidified this Grinch as being part of our family story. And then one Christmas, and of course I had 6 kids, and one Christmas we decided to do the California trip for Christmas. And the day that we had chosen for Universal Studios was rainy, it was cold, it wasn't like that great of a day. And as we are going through, they said, oh, you can go get free hot cocoa in this lounge. And we thought, oh, we'll go sit down, dry off, you know, sort of do all that. Well, the Grinch came through, and it just was the highlight of our whole day at Universal Studios, because he came and had hot cocoa with us and Max, and he did all these funny antics, and my kids just loved it. Well, they said we could take pictures, and so we did. And of course he would sabotage the pictures. He would stick his hand in front of one of my kids' face, and he'd make funny things and make them laugh, and then they wouldn't look at the camera, and you know, all of these things. And so when Robert Kaufman came out with their first line of Grinch fabric, of course I immediately get on, I buy a kit, and I make this quilt. Right, so this is our first Grinch quilt. That company has come out with several Grinch lines since then. We've made several of the quilts, because when you have 6 kids, everybody wants a Grinch quilt, right? So I made the quilt, and then when I decided to quilt it, because I didn't design the pattern, I didn't do anything, it was, you know, long before I had really become a designer. I was just a long arm quilter. I decided to get the book out, and I quilted the story by hand, every word on the quilt, so you can sort of see the writing, right? Well, I got to the end of the quilt and I didn't have enough room to finish the story. And so I decided that I would put it on the label. And so I did. And so I actually wrote on the label, and here is the rest of the story. It happens to be my favorite part of the story, which is the end of the story, right? Where his heart grows and all that stuff. But then on top of that, I was able to put a picture of my kids and the Grinch and Max during that Universal Studios trip. So this quilt actually literally does tell a story, but it also includes a picture of my kids, and they all remember that historic trip in our family vacation. And this is a coveted quilt in my family, and I have not felt the need to give it to any of my adult children because I'm not ready to let go of it myself, but they have plenty of other Grinch quilts that they can give. But printed treasures, I do a lot of labels on that fabric because it's ready-made. You pop it through your inkjet printer, and it's washable. And so quilts that I give to special people, I will write a letter. I'll write a love letter, why I made the quilt, where I made the quilt, why I chose to give it to them. Maybe it was a quilt that I specifically chose, you know, like one of my best friends. I don't even know how many quilts I've given her, but I'll see something and I'll think, oh, Carla would love that, so I will make that. Or whatever, I made her a quilt with like all of her favorite things or all of our favorite things or something like that. And so I wrote this love letter on printed treasures and sewed that to the back of the quilt so that later on, whatever happens to us, my kids will probably be selling quilts for 50 cents in a yard sale after I die. Someone else will be able to know part of that story, right? So I will haunt them if that happens, just to let all of you know. But so there's that. So that's one way to do a label, right? Or why you need to do a label. And another reason to do a label is years ago, I went to a quilt retreat, and it was my first time doing a quilt retreat. I didn't know. This is back in 2004, and I know that because it says it on my label. So we were able to go to this quilt retreat, and I remember we each brought projects, and we all worked out of the same book. It was Eleanor Burns' Still Stripping After 25 Years. Such a great title for a book, right? Well, halfway through the retreat, everybody had to make 2 blocks. We each brought these fall-themed fat quarters, and we made blocks, and then they went into a drawing, and whoever, there was 2 drawings, and whoever one block got pulled out won all the blocks. I happened to be one of them. And so we just took a piece of fabric, and everybody signed it. We put the name of the retreat and the year, and so it happened to be on something fusible, I think, just a piece of paper that or fabric that we had used. And so all I did was sew a border around it and fused it on before it was quilted. So I didn't even like sew this one on, but it's staying. And so it looks a little crooked, you know, whatever, it doesn't matter to me because it tells a story in itself, right? Labels are so important because if you just look at the front of this quilt, you're just going to see a pretty fall quilt, but you're not going to know that, you know, 12 ladies contributed to this quilt, and it happened to be in 2004, and it was a special weekend, right? So the other thing that I do and why labels are important is, you know, the information that they tell, the story that they tell, but you can say that where you made the quilt, why you made it, was it part of a class, what did you learn, why did you choose those colors? I mean, there's so many things that you can share on a label that tells part of the story of this quilt. And so I have this little quilt. I did a bunch of handwork on it, and several ladies chose a specific word when we were all working on these together, and mine says hope. That's a word I use a lot because it's my middle name, and I use it a lot just because it is a special thing in my family. But I also collect quotes, and on this specific label I said, you know, who taught me this class, where I took it, the year I took it, why I chose different things, because of course I always have to go rogue and I do things differently than everybody else, so all of my stuff always looks different than if I took a class or something. But I included a quote because I love the quote, and it's an Emily Dickinson quote, and it says, "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all." And so, you know, I collect all of these things. I never know where they're going to land, but it tells a story. So all of that to say, it is very, very important to label your quilt. And I think that's just part of the design process. I think it's a great tip. I think there's so many ways that you can do that. You can use an orphan quilt block. You can buy those pre-printed labels from the fabric shop. You know, you can get a whole panel for less than $10. Here's one right here. Use your fabric marker, you know, whatever. They also have these ones that are pre-printed for embroidery, so that way you can add a little bit, but you know, the complete pressure isn't on you to do that. And another thing that I do is you can, you know, fold over the edges, stitch it down, hand stitch it, do whatever is best for you. You know, typically I do it after binding or during binding, or like I did that one, I just fused it to the back of the quilt before quilting it. You can also sew it into your backing. If you're doing a pieced backing, sew it in, and you know, it's already done after the quilting is done. But here I have just one of those pre-printed labels, and you can use, I happen to have sew and interfacing, so I just sewed the quilt right sides together, sew around all of the edges. I cut a big thing in my interfacing, and then you just turn it inside out. And I have my little turner here so I can turn the edges, give it a press, write your pertinent information, anything that you want to know. But the basics are that you want to write your name, the year, and where you live. And the reason you want to do that, and for if it's going to someone, you should write to who it's going to. And the reason you want to write to where you are is because that also tells a story, right? Because my grandmother is from Iceland, and I have pieces in my home of things that she stitched, things that her sister stitched, things that were made in my family, and it says the year and it'll say their initials or whatever, and Iceland, because when I'm gone, how are my kids going to know that that piece is from Iceland? You know, and so the other thing is it also tells a story in itself. I grew up in Alaska. When I first started quilting, I lived in Spokane, Washington. Now I live in Central Washington. At some point, I'll be moving from here. And as my collection of quilts, when later on someone's looking, they're going to say, oh, Mom made that in Ephrata when we lived there from this year to this year. Or Mom made that when she lived in Spokane from this year to this year. And sometimes it's interesting to see how a quilt travels, right? So, and I ship quilts everywhere. And so I just want to tell you that you should label your quilts. It's an important part of the story. It's an important part of what the quilts will say when we're gone. So I just want to share all of that with you. I hope that you guys are joining along with the rest of the designers every hour on the hour Eastern Standard Time from 12 to 8 for today, tomorrow, and the next day. And if you've missed any of the videos, you can go to the Facebook group of the Designers Quilt Show and meet several designers, have a great time, and share some of the tips that you've learned with all of us. We love to see, I love to see the projects that you guys make, and if anything that I've said to you makes a difference in telling the story of your quilts. So thanks and have a great day.